The email came in like any other, a simple subject line: invitation to the Kim Seokjin show. Jungkook barely glanced at it at first. He got these all the time: requests from talk shows, music programs, variety panels. Most he declined, but Kim Seokjin was different. Seokjin's show was one of the biggest in South Korea, known for its blend of humor, controversy, and sharp interviews. It had a massive following. People tuned in not just for the guests, but for Seokjin himself. The way he pushed boundaries, challenged ideas, and sometimes outright humiliated his interviewees. Jungkook hesitated. His management team had already vetted the request. "It's a good opportunity," his manager had said. Seokjin reaches millions. Jungkook wasn't worried about exposure, but he was curious. He knew Seokjin's reputation, how he could turn an interview into a spectacle, how he thrived on making his guests uncomfortable. But Jungkook had never been one to back down from a challenge. "Set it up," he finally said. The day arrived, and Jungkook found himself in a sleek, glass-walled studio in Seoul. The green room was quiet, filled with the low hum of distant conversations. A production assistant handed him a bottled water, then disappeared. He checked his watch. The interview was set to begin in 10 minutes. Across the room, a large screen played highlights from Seokjin's past interviews. Jungkook watched as clips of K-pop idols, actors, and CEOs flashed across the screen. Some laughed nervously, some argued. Others sat stone-faced as Seokjin toyed with them like a cat with a mouse. Jungkook smiled slightly. He knew what was coming. He had been through enough interviews to recognize the pattern. Bait, provoke, wait for a reaction. The real question was, how far would Seokjin push? A stagehand appeared at the door. 5 minutes, Jungkook SSI. He stood, adjusting the sleeves of his black jacket. Then, with the ease of a man who had faced sold-out stadiums, intense fan scrutiny, and the pressures of global fame, he walked toward the stage. The studio was packed. Hundreds of people filled the seats waiting. Some were armies, others skeptics, and a few had probably just come for the drama. The set was modern. A circular stage surrounded by bright LED panels. A large desk sat at the center, with 2 chairs, one for Seokjin, one for Jungkook. The host himself was already there, flipping through a stack of cue cards. Kim Seokjin looked up as Jungkook approached, his grin wide and practiced. "Jungkook," he said, standing up to shake his hand. "Glad you could make it." Jungkook shook his hand firmly. Likewise. They took their seats as the audience hushed. The show's theme music played, cameras rolled, and the stage lights dimmed, leaving only the 2 men in sharp focus. Seokjin turned toward the camera, flashing his signature smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight. The golden magne of BTS, the voice behind countless hits, the one and only Jungkook." The audience clapped, some cheering, others murmuring. Seokjin leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "So, he began, his voice smooth. "People call you a genius, a once-in-a-generation talent. Some say you're changing the music industry. Others think you're just another idol, riding the wave of fame. Which one is it?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "I think the music speaks for itself." Seokjin tilted his head. "Fair enough. But let's talk about something a little more interesting than just music, shall we?" There was something in his tone, playful but sharp. The audience sensed it. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. But Jungkook had expected that. Seokjin leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. "Jungkook SSI, you've sold out stadiums, broken records, and even collaborated with some of the biggest names in the industry. Some would say you're living the dream. What do you say to that?" Jungkook chuckled. "I'd say dreams come with a lot of hard work and sleepless nights." The audience laughed, but Seokjin wasn't done. "Right, but let's be real," he pressed. "You've got more fame and influence than most people can even imagine. People worship you like some kind of idol. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should slow down before I burn out?" The crowd chuckled again, but there was something in Seokjin's delivery. Something just a little too pointed. He wasn't joking, not really. Jungkook nodded slowly, considering his response. I think if I were going to burn out, I'd at least have a few more albums under my belt by now. But unfortunately, I'm still just getting started. That got a few laughs, but Jihoon wasn't letting go. He flipped through his cue cards, pretending to search for something. Ah yes, he said, tapping one. Speaking of albums, didn't you just delay your solo project? Fans were pretty disappointed. Jungkook's expression didn't change. We had to make some adjustments, yes. Adjustments, Jihoon repeated, his grin sharpening. That's an interesting way to say left fans waiting. The audience murmured. The energy in the room had shifted. Jungkook was used to tough questions, but this was different. Jihoon wasn't probing, he was provoking. I assume you're talking about the production delays, Jungkook asked, his tone even. That's the one, Jihoon said, leaning forward. Reports say fans were heartbroken. Jungkook SSI, you've got millions of fans worldwide. Was that really necessary? Jungkook exhaled quietly. I think you know that creating music isn't about rushing to meet deadlines. It's about making something worth listening to. Quality takes time. Jihoon shrugged. Must be tough being a global superstar and making all those sacrifices. The audience gave a nervous laugh. Some clapped, others stayed quiet. Jungkook didn't flinch. It's tough making art that matters. There's a difference. Jihoon tilted his head, sensing an opening. He gestured toward the crowd. You hear that, folks? Tough being the guy who sells out stadiums and breaks records. A few more chuckles, a few more murmurs. Jungkook let the moment sit. Then he leaned forward just slightly. Do you want to have a real conversation? Or are you just here to perform? The air in the room tightened. The audience went dead silent. Even Jihoon blinked, just for a second. But he recovered quickly, flashing his signature smirk. Oh, I love a good conversation, Jungkook. But I also love the truth. And the truth is, people say you're guarded, that you hide behind the group, that you're afraid to stand on your own. What do you say to that? Jungkook raised an eyebrow. That's funny. I've been performing solo stages since I was a teenager. Doesn't sound like hiding to me. Jihoon smirked. Right, but let's talk about something people really care about. He turned to the audience. Do we have any armies in the crowd? A few hands went up. Jihoon grinned. Nice. You guys trust Jungkook SSI to always deliver, right? A few cheers, a few hesitations. Interesting, Jihoon said, turning back to Jungkook. Because some people don't. There have been rumors, criticisms, people saying you're overworked, that the industry is exploiting you. Do you ever feel responsible for setting those expectations? Jungkook's fingers tapped lightly against the desk. You know, Jihoon SSI, we could talk about any artist and find criticisms. But nobody asks other idols if they feel responsible for their fans' expectations. Jihoon chuckled. Fair, fair. But you're not just any idol, are you? You're Jungkook of BTS. The standards are higher. Jungkook smiled. And so is the pressure. But I've never shied away from it. Jihoon sighed theatrically. All right, let's move on. Solo projects, global tours, brand deals. What happens when it all becomes too much? When the fame starts to weigh you down? A few audience members laughed nervously. Jungkook stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, You watch too many dramas, The audience laughed again, but Jihoon wasn't backing off. But Jungkook, you can't tell me you don't see the risks. You want to keep pushing boundaries, keep breaking records. At what point do we start calling it what it is? Pressure. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. You think I'm trying to prove something? Jihoon spread his hands. I think when one artist has influence over millions, yeah, it raises some questions. The audience murmured. Some nodded. Others weren't so sure. Jungkook let the moment hang. Then he said, I think people should ask questions. I think curiosity is healthy. But the idea that I'm sitting backstage stressing over every little thing, that's a little ridiculous. Jihoon chuckled. Well, you did name one of your solo tracks Euphoria. Sounds pretty intense. Jungkook smiled faintly. It's actually about joy, but close. Jihoon waved it off. Okay. But let's talk about something you can't dismiss so easily. He turned to the audience. Raise your hand if you've heard about the rumors of burnout in the industry. A few hands went up, others stayed still. Jungkook's jaw didn't tighten, his expression didn't shift, but something changed in his eyes. Jihoon pressed forward. There have been reports, Jungkook SSI, artists saying they were overworked, exploited, pushed to their limits. That's happening inside your industry. So I have to ask, how does the guy who wants to inspire millions let this happen right here in Korea? A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Some people leaned forward. Others sat back, watching closely. Jungkook's voice was steady when he responded. You're talking about an issue that affects every major industry in the world. And when we see problems, we address them. Jihoon scoffed. Right, so you're saying it's just business as usual? Jungkook exhaled softly. I'm saying it's not unique to me, and it's not something we ignore. But if you want to talk about rumors, let's talk about your show. Jihoon blinked, just for a second. Excuse me? Jungkook leaned forward slightly. You work for a network that's been criticized for pushing sensationalism. You sit in that chair and call out the industry, but your show runs ads from big corporations, sponsors, and brands. The crowd stirred. This wasn't the usual back and forth anymore. Jihoon chuckled, but it was thinner now. Nice deflection, but I'm not the one. Jungkook cut him off. You're not the one making deals behind closed doors. You're not the one taking orders from executives who decide what stories get airtime. You're not the one profiting off drama. Silence. Jihoon opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. Jungkook continued, his voice calm. You want to talk about pressure? Let's talk about yours. You sit here pretending to be the voice of the people, but your paycheck comes from the same corporations you claim to call out. And the second you push too hard in the wrong direction, you're out of a job. The audience didn't know how to react. Some clapped, some just stared. Jihoon forced a chuckle. So now you're flipping this on me? Jungkook shrugged. I thought you liked the truth. For the first time that night, Jihoon didn't have a quick comeback. He shuffled his cue cards, trying to regain control, but something had shifted. Jungkook sat back, watching him. But the moment wasn't over yet. Jihoon cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. He wasn't used to being on the defensive. The control he usually wielded so effortlessly was slipping, and the audience could feel it. But he wasn't about to let Jungkook take over his show. All right, he said, forcing a grin. You got your shot in. But let's be real, Jungkook SSI. You love playing the underdog, the hardworking idol who's fighting against the system. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. But isn't that just branding? A global superstar isn't against the system. You are the system. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. Am I? Of course, Jihoon said. You're one of the most influential artists in the world. You decide what projects to take, what messages to send, what image to portray. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should use this power more responsibly? Jungkook's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room had shifted. The energy was heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Jihoon wasn't done. And let's not forget, he added, flipping to another cue card. You're friends with some interesting people. Guys with a whole lot of influence. You and Bang Si-hyuk. You and global brands, you and Jungkook cut him off. Would you like to talk about your friends? Jihoon SSI? The words weren't loud. They weren't even sharp. But they landed hard. Jihoon blinked. Excuse me? Jungkook's voice was steady. The people who fund your show. The executives who decide what you're allowed to say. The sponsors who make sure you never push too hard in one direction. The audience stirred. Jihoon forced a chuckle. Oh, so now you're turning this into some kind of conspiracy? Come on, Jungkook SSI. No conspiracy, Jungkook said. Just reality. You think I have power? You're right. But at least when I make a decision, people know where it's coming from. Can you say the same? Jihoon opened his mouth, closed it. Jungkook kept going. I create music. People hear it. They love it or they don't. If I fail, The whole world sees it. But you, he gestured around the set. You sit here pretending to challenge the powerful while taking notes from them backstage. Jihun's face twitched, just for a second. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some of them were nodding. A few clapped. Jihun could feel the control slipping. He had to get it back. You're dodging the question, he said quickly. This isn't about me. It's about you. People say you're guarded, that you push yourself too hard, that your fans are worried about you. Do you even care about the consequences of what you do? Jungkook leaned forward just slightly. Do you? Silence. Jihun opened his mouth again, but Jungkook wasn't finished. You make your living stirring controversy, he said calmly. You don't solve problems. You don't create anything. You just talk. And when the cameras stop rolling, when the drama dies down, what have you actually done? Jihun shifted in his seat. Jungkook kept going. I get it, he said. Your job is to get people talking, to entertain, to keep the ratings high. But don't confuse that with actually making a difference. The audience felt that one. A few people clapped. Others just watched, completely still. Jihun ran a hand through his hair, laughing tightly. Well, folks, he said, I think we just got a masterclass in deflection. Jungkook smiled. Or maybe in honesty. More claps. Jihun glanced at the producers offstage. They were watching carefully. His control over the interview was gone, and Jungkook knew it. But the real reaction was still coming. Jihun adjusted his tie, trying to keep the grin on his face. But something had shifted in the air. The confidence he had walked in with, the control he so effortlessly wielded over his guests, was slipping through his fingers. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to losing. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some leaned forward, watching intently. Others exchanged glances, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another talk show interview. It was something else, something real. Jihun glanced at his cue cards again, but he barely registered the words. He needed to turn this around fast. So, he said, forcing his voice back into its usual rhythm. You came here to talk about music, about the future. Let's end on a positive note, shall we? He gestured broadly. What's next? What's the next big Jungkook project that's going to inspire millions? It was a weak attempt at regaining control. Jungkook saw it, the audience saw it. But Jungkook leaned back slightly, considering the question. There are a lot of things in motion, he said finally. New music, collaborations, maybe even a world tour. But I think the biggest challenge isn't the projects, it's the message. Jihun raised an eyebrow. The message. Jungkook nodded. People don't trust the media anymore. They don't trust the narratives. And most of the time, for good reason. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jihun gave a tight chuckle. And you think you're the solution? Jungkook shook his head. No, but I think honesty is, and I think people are tired of being manipulated. Jihun scoffed. So what you're saying is, I'm the problem now. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. I think you're part of an industry that profits from keeping people divided, outraged, and distracted. You ask if I feel responsible for the things I create. Do you? Jihun blinked. For a split second, he had no answer. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Then someone in the audience clapped. Then another. And another. Jihun's jaw tightened slightly, but he covered it with another forced smile. Well, he said, shifting in his chair, this has certainly been an interesting conversation. Jungkook nodded. I'd say so. The studio lights burned hot. The cameras kept rolling. Jihun licked his lips, then forced himself to move on. All right, folks, he said, turning back to the audience. Give it up for Jungkook. A mix of applause and murmurs filled the room. Jungkook stood up, shook Jihun's hand, and walked off stage, leaving the host sitting there, still trying to process what had just happened. But the real storm was only beginning. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the tension in the studio didn't fade. It thickened. The usual post-show chatter was muted. The usual flurry of producers, assistants, and camera operators moved with an odd quietness. Jihun ripped off his earpiece and tossed it onto the desk. His face was still plastered with a forced grin, but his eyes darted toward his producer. "What the hell was that?" he muttered under his breath. The producer didn't answer. He was too busy staring at his phone. So was half the studio that IT had taken less than 5 minutes. The interview wasn't even officially online yet, but someone in the audience had been recording. Clips were already flooding social media. Twitter, no, X, was on fire. The headline practically wrote itself. Jungkook turns the tables on Kim Seokjin, calls out media hypocrisy on live TV. Jungkook had barely stepped backstage when his phone vibrated. He checked it. His mentions were skyrocketing. One clip, posted by an account with a few thousand followers, already had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments were pouring in. Jungkook just took Seokjin apart like a pro. This wasn't an interview. It was an execution. Seokjin wasn't ready for this at all. And then there were the think pieces, the debates, the analysis. Some called Jungkook's response brilliant. Others called it arrogant. Some claimed Seokjin had walked right into his own trap, while others argued Jungkook had dodged real accountability by flipping the script. Either way, one thing was undeniable. People weren't talking about Seokjin's questions. They were talking about Jungkook's answers. Seokjin stormed into his dressing room, slamming the door shut. His producer followed, speaking carefully. "Listen, we need to be ready for how this is going to play out." Seokjin scoffed, pouring himself a drink. "Oh, I know how it's going to play out. The internet's going to eat this up. Jungkook's stands are going to act like he walked on water, and I'm going to be the biased host who got owned." He shook his head. The guy literally dodged every question. The producer hesitated. Did he, though? Seokjin's jaw tightened. The producer sighed. "The thing is, Seokjin SSI, people don't like feeling like they've been manipulated. And tonight, you kind of looked like you were manipulating." Seokjin's grip on his glass tightened. The producer glanced at his phone again. "We need to get ahead of this." Seokjin exhaled sharply. "Yeah? And what do you suggest? Damage control?" Seokjin let out a bitter laugh. "You want me to apologize?" "Not happening." The producer shook his head. "Not an apology. A reframing. We spin it. Say Jungkook was deflecting, that he couldn't handle real scrutiny, that he proved he's just as guarded as the people he criticizes." Seokjin narrowed his eyes, considering it. But before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. An assistant stuck her head in. She looked nervous. "Gents," she said carefully, "the network wants a meeting. Now." Jungkook walked out of the studio and straight into a waiting car. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Big night?" Jungkook smirked. "Something like that." His phone buzzed again. A message from one of his closest managers. "That was insane. Your engagement numbers just went through the roof." Jungkook scrolled through his feed, watching the narrative unfold in real time. Every reaction, every breakdown, every hot take. He could already see what was coming next. Tomorrow, Seokjin's team would try to salvage this. They'd call him an idol-playing victim, a master of deflection, a media manipulator. They'd spin it every way they could, but it wouldn't matter, because tonight, in front of millions of people, the illusion had cracked. And once people see the cracks, they don't stop looking for more WY mourning. The interview had become more than just a viral clip. It was a moment. News outlets scrambled to cover it, each offering their own interpretation. Some called Jungkook's response a masterclass in composure. Others painted Seokjin as a host caught off guard by his own tactics. The debate wasn't just about what had been said, it was about what it meant. On one side, people saw Jungkook as a disruptor, someone who refused to play by the media's rules. An idol, yes, but one who spoke plainly, who wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy. That on the other side, critics argued that Jungkook had dodged real accountability, that he had masterfully redirected the conversation without ever answering for the pressures of the industry. But beyond the arguments, beyond the hot takes and think pieces, there was something deeper happening. People were questioning things. They were questioning how interviews were conducted, how narratives were shaped, how media figures like Seokjin thrived on spectacle more than truth. And that's where the real shift happened. Because once an audience starts asking why something feels off, Why a host seems more interested in a gotcha moment than a real discussion. Why certain artists or industries never get held to the same scrutiny. Once the process starts, it doesn't stop. And the media? It hates when people start thinking that way. The network. The meeting was tense. Jihoon sat across from the executives, arms crossed. He had been here before, after controversial interviews. But this time, it felt different. One of the higher-ups, a woman in a navy suit, set down her phone. The numbers are through the roof, she admitted. Highest engagement we've had all year. Jihoon forced a smile. See? You're welcome. Another executive sighed. The problem, Jihoon SSI, is that it's not going our way. Jihoon scoffed. Oh, come on. It's a news cycle. It'll die down in a few days. The woman in navy shook her head. This is bigger than that. The comments, the reactions, people aren't just talking about Jungkook. They're talking about us, about the industry, about how we do interviews, about whether we're actually holding powerful people accountable or just playing a role. Jihoon rolled his eyes. They'll forget. They always do. A long pause. One of the executives exchanged a look with another. Maybe, he said finally. Or maybe this time, they won't. Across the country, Jungkook was sitting in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee, reading through the headlines. His team had already compiled the data, engagement spikes, media reactions, sentiment tracking. He barely paid attention to it. Instead, he scrolled through a simple post someone had made on X the night before. It wasn't from a journalist. It wasn't from a critic. It was just a regular person, someone who had watched the interview and summed it up in a single sentence. The scariest thing about last night wasn't what Jungkook said. It was realizing how badly the media wants to control the story. Jungkook smiled slightly, setting his phone down. He knew this moment wouldn't last forever, but it didn't have to, because all it took was one crack in the facade, one moment where people saw the strings being pulled. And once you see the strings, you never look at the puppet show the same way again. The real lesson in all of this wasn't about Jungkook or Kim Jihoon. It wasn't about who won or who lost the interview. It was about perception. People like Jihoon had built careers on controlling narratives. They shaped public opinion, decided what was newsworthy, and framed discussions in ways that benefited their industry. But for the first time in a long time, the audience saw through it. And that's the part that truly mattered. Because in a world where information is everywhere, the real power doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who learn to listen. What do you think? Was this just another viral moment, or was it something bigger? Drop a comment below, hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more. Because the conversations that actually matter, they're just getting started.